Welcome to the Relocated South African, the show for navigating immigration from South Africa for a better future. I'm your host, Jan Hugo from Lagos in Portugal. Check out our website, www.therelocatedsoutafrican.com. Contains a whole lot of useful information and details of all episodes to date. If you want to interact with us, comment on our discussions, or even participate in an interview, please contact me on jan@therelocatedsoutafrican.com. Also, if you like our content, why not subscribe on your favorite platform? And if you want, send us any questions or comments that you have. We have recently spoken to a number of people who have family, especially children abroad, and started thinking about the suffering of parents and siblings who stay behind. And today I'm privileged to welcome to the show all the way from Brisbane in Australia, Janet Edwards. She's the author of The Overseas Caregiver's Guide. Welcome, Janet.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
Great to have you. Janet, so just give us a little bit of info about your immigration journey. I know you moved many years ago. What led to the decision to leave in the first place?
Basically, the same as everybody, the crime and no punishment. And our son was 17, 15 when we applied, and pretty much about his future. Where was he going to be as a white male? Would he be able to get a job after he finished university or whatever trade he decided to do? So back in 2001, we applied on a skilled independent visa. And I did all paperwork myself because as a PA, I figured I could fill in a form. And basically, we spoke about it as a family. And even our son, we said, this is a decision we're making together. And we were all in. And the process, we were told, would take 2 years. So when you fill in the form and you submit it with your 5,000 Rand, that was a lot of money for us at that time. And there's no guarantee that you're going to get in. There's no guarantee, the money doesn't come back to you. But we did it. So my husband, Lawrence, is a qualified electrician, and our son was 17. And we could have gotten into New Zealand within 3 months, but we wanted Australia. So that's why it took the 2 years.
And also, I was just going to ask, you said New Zealand was another option. So basically you decided to go in that direction, not the UK, not Europe.
Well, I think it came down to, what do you know? So coming from Durban, Brisbane climate is exactly the same. And we felt it would be an easier move to go with what you know, because we don't know anything about living in snow and shoveling snow and putting chains on wheels. So it was a simpler decision. And the weather in Australia is very similar to South Africa. And Brisbane was just because it's closer to most things. Perth's, it's 5.5 hours on a flight from Brisbane to Perth. And that's very
isolated.
Isolated.
Yeah.
Closer to Singapore.
Yeah. And obviously we're going to get to your book, but at that time, I guess your parents were 20 years younger than what they are today, or they may pass. Obviously, was it a very emotional decision for you and for them when you decided to go? Were they supportive, or how did that process go?
It was. They understood why we were doing it. But there was also that separation guilt, if you want to call it that, because, we were here jetting off to a different country and taking their grandson with. We've only got the one child. And there is that, when am I going to see you again? It definitely weighs on your shoulders, as a lot of people. But after we were here for a couple of years, they came out and they saw where we lived. They saw how safe we were. They saw, basically, the picture in their head was solidified that we were okay. And that helped them. I mean, I know not everybody can, bring their folks over, but it was just a quick visit. And we went back to South Africa probably about 5 or 6 times over the period.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that helps, obviously with video calls and so on, but it is that personal contact and touch and feeling of being close, and the downside is then you have to leave again, and then it reminds you of how bad it is.
Makes it very difficult, yes. But the big Sunday family dinners with all the kids running around, and those kind of things that you miss.
Yeah, I often talk about that. In that, it's a grieving process. And I think when you speak to psychologists, it's the same thing. It's like losing somebody, but they're still alive. And, it's a very hard process. But anyway, that brings us to the Overseas Caregivers Guide. So tell us, what inspired you to write the Overseas Caregivers Guide?
Well, basically over the time that we were here, like you said, my parents were getting older and they were living in a duplex, or here in Australia they call them a townhouse. So we had to help them to sell that because of the stairs, and my mother couldn't sort of manage the stairs anymore. And we found a place in a retirement village in Scottsboro, and they bought a house there. So it was a matter of from here, and it's the sale of their house and the purchase of the new house. And then over time, the house was getting too big. So we moved them into a bedsit, which was rented. So again, a lot of processes. I managed to get power of attorney for my parents. And with that, I could pretty much do anything that they needed me to do. So I had access to bank accounts and just making their life easier. My mom passed in 19, and I changed the power of attorney just for my dad, because you have to have a new piece of paper, of course, if there's a change in the people that you're looking after. And after he passed in January, I realized that I'm an organized person, and I had made up systems and things that help me to deal with things. And I figured that there must be people out there who would want to know how to do things. So I put all the information together based on my experiences into the Overseas Caregivers Guide. It's kind of like a roadmap.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, obviously living, with a massive time difference, for instance, that must have been exceptionally difficult to deal with stuff with days and nights and so on.
Yeah. Australia, well, in Brisbane, we are exactly 8 hours ahead of South Africa. And I would have access to my dad's iPhone, so I could actually log into iCloud in the back and set up appointments for him in his iPhone, and it would be, when he had to do whatever it was, doctor's appointments or anything like that. But yeah, the time zone is an issue, especially when you're phoning South Africa and you're trying to, some organization, let's say, and you're trying to relay your question. There's always that difficulty of the time delay on the phone, as well as whatever you're trying to explain, and you're trying to explain it on behalf of somebody else, and there's the privacy issue that comes into it.
Wow.
So you keep on having to say, look, I have got power of attorney. I can email you a copy. So that made things easy.
I can imagine. Just a question before we get to the moving on. Do you think, and maybe this is where this Caregiver's Guide comes in, if you had known what you know now, that planning would have made it easier? If you had known what was waiting for you, like the day before you got on the plane, had that power of attorney signed, had the documents and things in place?
Definitely have done it. Definitely.
Okay.
Because, people say, well, my parents aren't that old. They're still independent. That's the perfect time to do it, because they are still independent. They fully compos mentis, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. I mean, nobody knows that. But if you set those documents up, you go into the bank with your parents or into the lawyer's office and get the documentation done. And this, apart from the power of attorney, the most important thing is your parents' will up to date? And do they have a living will? And the living will is extremely important, because they're deciding what's going to happen if they were in an accident, or when they get older and they've got dementia, and just to know what to do. I mean, when my dad passed in January this year, and it was about 2:20 in the morning, a.m., that I got a call from the hospital to say that his condition had deteriorated and they wanted to put him onto a ventilator. And straight away I said, no, that's not what he wanted. He didn't want some machine keeping him alive. But if I didn't have that piece of paper that was his decision, it would have been my decision. And I didn't want that on my shoulders. So immediately just said to the doctor, no. And it comes across as being harsh, but it's not my decision. It was his decision.
I think that's absolutely right. And, the one thing that we know about this podcast is that a lot of our listeners are still in South Africa. And I think, just as a start, think about these things, because often when people leave, when you immigrate, you don't think about the people who stay behind. You are so focused on getting there yourself with all the stresses and things that go with it. So I think that's fantastic. So let's move on. What do you think in that regard, what do most people underestimate about caring for parents from abroad?
Pretty much the emotional weight. That's the main thing, like knowing who to call in emergency. I mean, I did a post on our Facebook group the other day about what happens if your dad was in an accident and was taken to hospital. What's your game plan? Like, do you know what to do? Do you know their medical history? Do you know their doctor's name? Like, who can you call to do anything? And it's just about, I guess it comes down to being organized. And I only found these things out by trial and error. And if you can avoid the trial and error part and go straight to having a plan, then you're going to be better off in terms of your mindset and your parents' mindset. Because if they know that they also feel
Yeah, I think, and I've said this before, immigrating from South Africa is a much bigger issue than immigrating from the UK to Portugal or from one European country to another, because you can go home for a weekend. It's very easy. So if there's a crisis, you just get on the plane. And similarly, if you had a crisis in Brisbane, your parents couldn't every time get on the plane. Similarly, if they have a crisis. So what you're saying is be prepared, have systems in place for when that occurs and you can't fly.
Absolutely.
So that makes a lot of sense. So tell us a bit about the guide itself. What will the listeners find inside?
Well, I've got 12 chapters in all, and they cover things like finances made simple and managing their accounts and bills. When I took over my mom's account, my parents' account, there were things in there. They were paying a security firm for the house that they moved out of. And because of my mom's age, she wasn't really on top of things. So they were paying for things on a debit order that they didn't actually need to pay. So I went through, say, 4 months of bank statements and culled it, to the things that they didn't actually need to pay for. There's things in there about building a local support network. So if your parents are living independently, do you know their neighbors? If they had an issue, could you call on a neighbor? Do you know the neighbor's phone number that they could maybe just run next door and help out? Paperwork, filing, the legal documents like the power of attorney and the wills, those are important. Having access to their bank account. I had full access to my parents' bank account. And one of the most critical things that people don't think about is the medical aid. I mean, my folks were on Discovery, and at the end, my dad was in hospital for a month, and the charges that were coming through were phenomenal. For example, the testing, when you have a blood test or whatever test they're going to do, they send it off to the lab. And then you look at the Discovery charges, and some of them are coded with a code that means that the supplier, so the path lab, didn't use the correct code. And if they can't get the correct code, Discovery just charges the person, the member. So I went through all of these charges, realized about this code, and I contacted Empath, which was the path lab that was doing all the tests. And I said, these are not for his account. You have to sort it out because you used the wrong code. And they did. I got hold of a very good person, and they basically reversed all of those charges. And I saved about $13,500 in doing that.
Is rand or dollars?
My apologies. I keep on saying dollars now.
Yeah.
13,500 rand.
That's still a lot of money.
And other charges were where he was in hospital for an entire month and they were charging out of hospital fees. And I said, no, his cover is comprehensive. So there shouldn't be any charge for that. And I'm not paying it. So it's kind of like if you don't look in the back end, you're going to get rorted by the system.
You also said your dad got scammed by the bank?
Oh, yes. It was a Sunday, and he was in Pinetown. They were drawing money at the ATM, and this man behind him said, my dad was walking away, and he said, you need to put your card back in the machine because you've broken it. And my dad, he thought, well, I must have done something. And that turned out to be over 20,000 rand worth of money that just disappeared literally within an hour. And there was a limit on the bank account as well, but they work it. I'm not exactly sure how they do it, but it doesn't matter that you've got a limit on your bank account. They can still access the money. And they were shopping at the Pavilion for leather goods and everything. So basically, they did phone the number. My sister went back with him to phone the number on the machine, and it was already too late. And the bank, one of the big ones, basically said that he was scammed. It's his fault. And I read their rules from the bank, and I took them to the banking ombudsman. And I said it wasn't his fault because he believed that his card was safe inside the machine. It was a Sunday, the bank wasn't open. He was going to come back on Monday and fetch the card, retrieve the card. He had no idea that money had gone out of his account. And the banking ombudsman actually sided with my dad and my logic based on their rules, and they ordered the bank to refund the money.
Wow, that's amazing.
But I think people think, because they're a bank, they must be right. That's not true. You can fight.
Yep, absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned here is the preparing for the future. I mean, nobody wants to think about funerals and things like that, but I guess that is an important thing because that's also a place where I sometimes get the impression that people get completely rip off because it's such an emotional time for them.
Well, it is true. And I had my parents, both of them had wills. My dad was the one who had a living will. And when I organized his funeral in January, basically got help from friends in South Africa who gave me the name of a funeral parlor, and I dealt entirely with them. I got all the entire service done from here in Australia, just having meetings. And then the other part of that is I knew his will was with a law company, and I communicated with them. Basically, as I was an executor on Dad's will, I also cleared all his debts. I made a spreadsheet with his bank accounts, the various balances, his pension, all the communication, the contact person for the pension, anything that was related to his personal effects and medical. I contacted all his doctors, sent emails. It was basically a process. So, these are the people I need to contact. But all of that was done way beforehand.
Very good.
So when it came time to doing it, it was kind of methodical, without trying to put aside the grief that I was feeling and the loss. It was just get a grip, get this done, get through this, and then you can crack. And that's what I did.
Absolutely. Well done. And Janet, how do you balance the emotional and practical sides of caregiving? Because I think you touched on it now, saying you were grieving, but at the same time you had to do these practical things.
That part, Lawrence and I have been married for 40 years, so we basically support each other. So I've got a very good home life and a home, grounding. And, if I needed a shoulder, he's always there. And it was like, you can do this, you can get through this, and what do you need me to do? So from an emotional point of view, I've got somebody to lean on. And then, having his support and then going, all right, let's just focus. Let me just do 2 things today or 3 things today or 4 things, depending on the level of my emotions on that particular day. I just did it 1 thing or 2 things. And then once you've cleared that 1 thing, it's a tick in the box. And then you can focus on what's next. So it's just basically taking 1 bite at a time to get through.
Excellent. I think you said that you taught your dad at a very late age to use Siri and WhatsApp. I think that's awesome.
My husband and my son laughed at me and they said, he's never going to get it. Just give up. And I said, no, he'll get it. And I literally wrote out a script that he would say. And the script was, hey, Siri, call Janet on WhatsApp. That was it. And he would go, hey, Siri. And I said, no, Dad, her name is Siri. Don't call her Siri. His name is George. And I said, nobody calls you George. And then he'd go and he'd say, hey, Siri, please. And I said, no, Dad, don't say please. She's a soldier. You're the general. You tell her what you want, she'll do it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And then he would just, every day, he would call me at 4:00 in the afternoon, my afternoon. And he would say, hey, Siri, call Janet on WhatsApp. And we'd have a video call every day, for about 15 minutes or so and catch up on what was going on in his life or their life and what was going on here. Those are the calls that I really miss those ones.
I can imagine. Jonathan, who would benefit most from the Overseas Caregivers Guide?
Basically, all South African expats. It doesn't matter where you're living in the world. I mean, I'm in Australia, but that's my choice. But there's people in South Korea. or Japan or America. In Australia, there's a load of South Africans. People who write on these forums and they say, we're moving to whatever city, which suburb are all the South Africans, where are the South Africans in? And we go like all over. There's just so many. I mean, you can stand in the queue at Woolies and hear people speaking Afrikaans, like they're talking privately and nobody else can understand them, but you're standing there and you're thinking like, no, people can understand you. So pretty much any expat living anywhere in the world is our market.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. Anybody with family back home. I'm thinking I should send it to my kids because they live in Ireland and all over the world, and I'm in Portugal, but it doesn't change what's happening because I also need to write out lists of things to do when something happens to me, because we're not going to live forever, and I don't think they've thought about it. Maybe I should remind them.
No, it's true. You don't think about it when you're younger. You just think, well, your parents will be there forever.
Yeah. So what's the one piece of advice that you'd give somebody listening right now who feels overwhelmed about helping their parents from afar?
Just do one thing. If you're going to start with something, then ask your parents if their wills are up to date. That will could have been sitting in that filing cabinet for 20 years and things have changed. Just get them to read it, get them to review it, and just keep things up to date. And start with a shared calendar, a Google Calendar, and set it up for your parents. I mean, if they're technologically astute, then set it up, set the time zone to South Africa, ask them when their appointments are, their doctor's appointments, and enter those in and set an alert for 20 minutes prior or half an hour prior to whatever that meeting is. Just start, even if it's just one little thing. And then, make a list, go through the list and go, well, I've done that, I've done this, that's prepared, that's ready. Talk to your parents about, do they want to be buried or cremated? And that's all, it's got to be in their will, but it's a conversation that you can actually have with them. And nobody wants to have that conversation, but it's reality. One day they're going to be gone.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, the one thing that comes to mind for me is often there's this thought of, I don't want to call it a burden, but do you think that the burden of caring for parents should stop people from immigrating? Because we often face, young kids are faced, or young people faced with an opportunity, but they have parents. My sense is almost that you can still go, just plan properly and do these things that you talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because, I mean, it's your life. It's your little family, your little ecosystem. If life is going to be better for you in Australia or the US or wherever you've chosen, then you should do that with your family because that's what you want to do. And yes, leaving your parents is really hard, but if you are going to be safer, if you're going to be able to get a job, if you're going to have your own dreams and your own life, then you should go with it. You should do it. But have the systems that are set up to balance with what your parents are going through. So, yes, you're taking the grandkids away, but then have video conferences every day or every second day, or whatever timing suits you, and let them see the grandkids and have interaction. And also the interaction for yourself. And then keep checking on if your parents have got other family or friends or support. Speak to those people as well and say, is everything going okay? Because, on the phone, your mom or your dad say, no, everything, alles reg, geen probleem nie. But they're hiding things from you that they don't want you to know about because they don't want you to worry, because that's what parents do. They don't want the kids to worry. So dig a little and just check that they are actually doing okay, that they're not facing some problem that they feel is insurmountable, that you could maybe make one phone call and sort out.
Absolutely. And Janet, if you think back of your past 20 plus years of living in Brisbane and the decision that you made and the journey, would you do it again?
Absolutely. When we moved over here, we didn't know anybody in Brisbane, and we basically just decided we were going to move to Australia. My husband's an electrician, and we got permanent residency with our visa before we left South Africa. And I know it doesn't always work that way with people, but it was after the 2-year application thing had processed, and we moved over, it was absolutely the best move we ever made. I mean, we rented a house for 8 months and then we bought the house. This is still the same house we're living in now. We bought an investment house and kept that for a number of years and then sold it. And it was all about, if you're going to move and you want to get back to the same level that you were at, then you need to put in the hard work, and it wasn't easy. I mean, coming here, your rand means nothing really. And you've got to save money and you've got to work hard. And the one thing about moving to another country that people don't really realize is you can't just move and then have your little South African community, whether it's English or Afrikaans. You can't just live in this ecosystem. You have to make friends with Australians or whichever country you're in. Join a sports club or join a group, join a gym, just join something. Chat to the school moms, if you're at that age. But you have to assimilate into the environment that you move into, because they're not going to basically open the door and say, come on in. You have to make the effort to assimilate into that country. And if you are predominantly Afrikaans speaking, then you need to brush up on your English. I mean, I can switch between the two languages. English is my home language, so obviously it's a lot more comfortable, but you still have to assimilate into another environment. You can't just be mixing with South Africans. And it helps, definitely helps.
That's come out in every single discussion. I think the people who are the most unhappy are the ones who are sitting at home waiting for something to happen, for somebody to come to them. They're not going to come to you because you talk funny. They've got their own lives.
Lifestyles here, like in South Africa, it was like, come round to the house, we'll have a braai. Here it's different. People don't go to people's houses as much as in South Africa, because here you don't have a maid to clean up after your barbecue. You're going to do the washing, you're going to hang the washing, you're going to iron the washing. It's all a do-it-yourself thing. And Aussies are very much like that. So they'd rather meet at a barbecue in a park or at the beach or whatever the situation is, but go and do it outdoors. And then everybody has a good time. And then you go home back to your own house, and whether you've washed the kitchen floor or not doesn't make any difference.
Yeah. No, that's very true, Janet. I think we're getting towards the end. If you could leave our listeners with one thought, what would it be?
Get organized. You just start small and do something your own. If you're not going to get the Overseas Caregivers Guide, then make your own list and just go through and say, all right, I've done that. I've spoken to mom, I've spoken to dad, or both of them, and just make a plan to get things sorted out. Speak to your parents and ask them. So if your parents are still younger, great. Get them to get organized themselves for down the track. Because down the track, you're going to come back and go, I really should have done that. And, by that stage, you're going to be totally stressed out, which is not ideal for your family here or your family there.
Do you think it's okay? You touched on it, that parents who have kids abroad don't want to tell their kids that they're not feeling well or that things aren't great. Maybe it's important to tell them that they can say if they're not feeling good, that they can say they're missing you, because I think sometimes, especially South Africans, we tend to sometimes keep our emotions to ourselves. Am I right in that respect?
Definitely. I mean, I would speak to my mom and she would, she'd say something, but I could hear something in her voice. I guess it's when you know the person that well that you can pick up on those things. But maybe some parents are better at hiding those emotions. And I think that talking about it and bringing it out and saying, Mom, are you really okay? What happened? And then she would say, it's nothing, it's small, it was just this. And she would relay it. And I'd say, Mom, that's okay. You can do this. Now just go and speak to so-and-so and I'll send them an email and I'll explain things and we can sort it out. Or I'll phone them, whichever way it goes. But, you can make that phone call. You can send that email, because you're obviously more technologically astute than your parents.
And I mean, this is probably a stupid question. Practically making a phone call, I've found from Portugal, when you have to call, say, Discovery or FNB, it's quite difficult because it's costly if you phone from a landline or a cell phone and you can't call those numbers on a WhatsApp. In the old days, I used to use Skype to make those calls, but that's no longer. I think you can do it on Teams. It's kind of the technology that you've used all the time.
No, basically, I've just made a phone call. And look, if I can phone them through WhatsApp, which is free, then I'll do that. But a lot of the times, I just pick up my mobile phone. I mean, in Australia, they don't call them cell phones, they call them mobiles, which is completely weird. But anyway. And I would look on their website, and there's generally an international number. So you'd have the Johannesburg code of 011 prior to the number, instead of the 1-800 numbers, because you obviously can't call a 1-800 number. The infuriating thing is when they answer the phone on the other side and you're trying to explain something and then they put you on hold, or they want to know what permission you've got to speak to them about your parents' account, because accounts privacy nowadays is just, I mean, you can't get around it. And by saying, I've got power of attorney, it opens a lot of doors.
I think it's quite a practical thing because, you get put on hold and sometimes it takes forever for them to answer you and so on. So, yeah, that is another practical thing to consider. I mean, just to end with, where can people get the guide? Where can they buy it? And maybe if you want to share your website and your Facebook group with us.
The easiest way is just to go through on the Facebook group, the Overseas Caregiver. So if you search for the Overseas Caregiver on Facebook, it'll come up with my group. The website, I can give it to you, and you can maybe put it onto the podcast as a link, because it's a little bit longer than your normal the Overseas Caregiver. And at the moment, I've got a 44% discount on a voucher for anybody who wants to get the Overseas Caregiver's Guide. And that's going to be up in a couple of weeks, but I can extend that, obviously. And the code on that, I'll send you the details. The code for the discount is Flamingo. And I've been doing a couple of posts on Facebook, and the code Flamingo comes from, are you a pigeon flying back home for every single thing, or can you stand tall like a flamingo and handle it from...
That's very clever. That's awesome.
And handle everything from here. So I've got to try and think of different ways to get through to people. And I just thought, well, homing pigeons, they're always en route. They're always going back home. So I thought, well, I'll do a post about homing pigeons and rather stand as a flamingo. I mean, understand flamingos aren't in Australia.
That's awesome. So, okay, I'll put the details on the website, on the show notes for this podcast, and obviously,
thank you.
People can just go to your Facebook group for the
They
Caregiver.
can go directly to the group and ask any questions they may have as well. So it's obviously an open forum. So just put your comments, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability.
And they can buy the book on there as well.
They can't buy it on the Facebook group, but they can basically, ask for a link, and I'll send them a link. Not a problem.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Janet. I really appreciate you sharing your journey. I think it's an awesome book and guide. I think it's so important for people to have access to something like that. And I really wish you well with the book and with your Facebook group and helping people. And that's what we try and do with the podcast, is to help as many people on this journey, because there's nie vir sissies nie. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope all those people out there just do one thing.
Absolutely.
Stop.
Just do one thing. Exactly. So if you want to comment on Janet's journey or her story, or participate in an interview, please contact me on jan@relocatedSouthAfrican.com. Also check out our website and subscribe on your favorite platform. Until next time,